Good afternoon. Technology is not our friend today, and I'm sorry about that. But I want to introduce to you our expert panel. On my immediate left is Dr. Margaret Denton, and spoiler alert, she actually taught me gerontology. She is a professor emeritus of the Department of Health, Aging, Society, and Sociology, and a senior social scientist in residence at McMaster. She taught courses both to the graduate and undergraduate level for 25 years. And she is also vice president of the Hamilton Council on Aging, and they, like us in Cambridge, are trying to make sure their communities are age-friendly. Heather Thompson, who is immediately behind me, is the manager of age-friendly initiatives with Community Development Halton and a strong advocate for older adults. She's going to share with us their Senior Connector program, which is a volunteer program offering resources and referrals in both languages to seniors and their families. Senior volunteers provide face-to-face contact, connecting seniors with community information and services in Halton. June Anderson, who is probably known to a great many of you, is the spiritual care advisor at the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank, one of the hard-working partners in the Cambridge Seniors as Leaders and Mentors program, one of the facilitators for our training, and a member of the advisory group. She is also a member of the Cambridge Council on Aging and the Raging Grannies Choir. June's favorite line is, "Have you asked anyone today how they are?" Linda Fleming, who's a longtime senior manager with Community Support Connections, Meals on Wheels, and more, is a wealth of information on care for caregivers and other groups who are often isolated. She's also a member of our advisory committee for the Seniors as Leaders and Mentors and the Cambridge Council on Aging. Please welcome your expert panel.
Okay, can everyone hear me from this mic here? Perfect. Okay, so you all remember me. I'm Rachel. I talked your ear off this morning before lunch. Thanks for listening. I'm just here. I'm not going to be talking too much. My job is just to make sure that everyone here kind of stays on the course. I'm just going to kind of keep all these ladies in line and make sure that we don't go too far past 2:30. So that's going to be my job today. So we're going to jump right in. And the very first question we have for the expert panel: what can you tell us about your work with older adults and social isolation? Would someone like to volunteer to go first?
Why don't you go first, and then you can talk about peer connectors. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. As Sharon had mentioned, I work with the Community Development Halton, and I'm the project coordinator for the Burlington Age Friendly Council, as well as the Halton Age Friendly Council. And I was asked to speak a little bit about our program we started 4 years ago called the Senior Connector program, and I'd like to talk just a couple of minutes on that, and also our Home Share program, which we've also started in Halton. And we also have a Senior Isolation Collaborative, and thank you, Rachel, for all your comments this morning, because it is very complex, and we're going through that journey ourselves. So the Senior Connector program came about because we did an audit and with our Age Friendly Council, and under the domains of communication and information, we found that people were telling us they did not know where to get information, and sometimes they were in crisis and it was difficult. They were trying to find services that they wanted and didn't know quite how to access them. So rather than reinvent the wheel, I looked online under Senior Connector because that seemed to be an appropriate role for someone who could do that. And in British Columbia, there was a Senior Connector program. So I phoned them and had a good chat, and I thought, gee, this program is really neat. Can we use your name? And the executive director said, sure, go ahead. So we wrote our first grant for the Seniors Community Grant, and we received that. And we envisioned that the Connector program would be we'd have volunteers who were older adults and peers, and they could be educated on all the services there are in Halton and could be then placed in locations where other seniors reside or congregate to provide important information. So that's how we started, and we knew that people wanted that face-to-face contact and that trust. So we run an 8-week training program where we provide all kinds of information, everything from geriatric mental health services, Service Canada, dementia services, everything you can possibly imagine we tried to put in there. And then we found locations where people could be. So we're in apartment buildings, we're in libraries, we have leaders of exercise programs, we're in grocery stores, drugstores. We're just at the Y now and at the banks, and just trying to be where people are so that they can get information. And we have it's all hard copy information, so we have large tables, and our connectors have their name tags, of course, and they just reach out to people and hand out information. And whatever information we don't have, we say, can we call you back and let you know? And we will get that to you very, very quickly if we can. So that's one of the things that we have started. It's been very, very successful because we hope this is sort of preventative in a way that people can get information before they need the help. And we always ask. And interestingly enough, we ask all our connectors to please record every question being asked, because we need to know where the gaps are and what are the questions people are asking. So some of the top questions are issues around falls and prevention, exercise classes. But the one that surprised us the most was the loneliness. People were coming to our connectors and just sitting down and telling them how lonely they were. So we didn't expect that, and that was something new. And sometimes they were referred to other services if they've lost a loved one. There's some bereavement services, et cetera, they could go to, and or just a chance to talk, and they know they're there. And I said, that's perfectly okay. People just want to come and talk. That's wonderful. So that's our Senior Connector program. We're continuing to grow. Our funding has stopped, but we're maintaining it somehow. And we're looking for future funding to continue. And we are in all communities in Halton. So we're in Halton Hills, Milton, Oakville, and in Burlington. And we also did a special connection out to the Halton Multicultural Council and trained many seniors in there to go back to their communities so they could also share that information. And just quickly, the Halton Home Share program, we developed a Halton Home Share program because we know many seniors are living in large homes in Burlington and throughout Halton, and they don't want to leave their home. But they need help. They need help with chores around the house. So our housing committee thought, what could we do to make a difference? So we started a Halton Home Share program in a sense that we did a toolkit. This is what the toolkit looks like right here. And we started looking at what we could do to help people stay in their homes. And we did a lot of research. We went to the States. We know what's happening a lot in the UK, in Europe, and in the States. And we found that most people who did home share wanted it because of the security at night. That was number one. And it also decreased loneliness, isolation, gave companionship. And the good news is we needed an overriding agency to oversee it. And our other municipality, the regional municipality of Halton, who does take care of a lot of housing, came to us and said, we're interested in that, so we'll operate it for you. So that was a wonderful win-win situation. And we help with a lot of the promotion, education, and sort of just the recommendations and standards around it. And so they are now doing the program. So that's just quickly. I hope that's enough time. There's other things too, but I can talk about that later maybe. So, okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Heather. Margaret, would you like to tell us about some of the work that you do with social isolation?
Yes, so I want to talk about 3 different programs that the Hamilton Council on Aging is coordinating that help to reduce social isolation. And the first one is our Seniors Ambassador program. Now, we had a Senior Peer Connector program. We copied Heather's program that was successful in Burlington, and we implemented one in Hamilton in partnership with the library. But now we've kind of moved on from that to the second sort of part of that program. And the idea is that we're going to be working with leaders from diverse communities. So, for example, they might be different ethnocultural community. We're going to be working with the Mandarin and Cantonese, a group of Mandarin and Cantonese, a group of Spanish seniors, a group of seniors from one of the mosques, for example. And we're identifying someone from each of those groups who will act as an ambassador for that group. And we developed a lot of resources in our peer connector program. So we're going to, for example, we worked with Information Hamilton to develop a directory, Age-Friendly Hamilton directory, which lists all the different services and recreational activities that are available to older adults. It gives phone numbers, web pages, etc. And we're going to be translating this into eventually 10 different languages so that once we train the senior ambassador for that group and they have the resources, they'll be able to work with people in that group to help them connect to community services and to leisure activities and things like that, or even organize events for their apartment or for their group. So that's how sort of our program has morphed, and we're getting funding from the United Way, actually, in Hamilton. Another program that we have is recognizing that some of the barriers to getting out and about for people who are socially isolated is transportation. We have another program called Let's Get Moving, and it's composed of 3 types of workshops. The first one is a bus workshop, where we bring people together. We usually go to seniors groups as well, and we talk about taking the bus, because many older adults haven't taken the bus in years, or they're thinking about giving up driving, or they want to reduce their driving. So we just have a presentation, that talks about the new buses and how to get on and off them and how to plan your route, and we talk about the Presto card and the seniors bus fare and the Golden Pass and things like that. And then we've partnered with a HSR in Hamilton, and they bring along a bus. And then the group, 25 seniors, usually get on the bus, and the driver kind of gives them, some heads up about how things work. And then we mirror a bus route, and we take a trip somewhere interesting and have a lunch and then kind of come back. So that's been very popular, and we've gotten money from the Ontario government to run those. We've run 25 bus works so far, and we've got another 10 coming up. And then we've got another workshop called Let's Take a Walk. And Hamilton has all kinds of wonderful outdoor trails. And so we had a group of older adults and students who assessed those trails to see how age-friendly they were, how walkable they were, and graded them into 3 levels. Let's take a stroll, let's take a walk, let's take a hike, or whatever. And we created a resource. And the resource sort of shows a map of the trail, shows all the features of the trail, whether there's washrooms there or, picnic benches or whatever. It shows the bus stops if you want to take a bus to get to the trail. It also now shows where you can pick up a Sobe bike. So we have a Sobe bike program in Hamilton where you can sort of rent a bike. And so the third workshop we're going to be developing and offering over the summer is Let's Take a Bike. So older adults are going to be able to, maybe take a bus to where there's a bike and take a bike. So that's one of the programs that we have that we hope will help to reduce social isolation. But in a way, one of the more important ones is, they're all important, but we were one of the 8 communities in Canada who received funding from the New Horizons grant. And this grant, the Hamilton Council on Aging is the backbone organization for this grant, but it's composed of 7 different agencies, 6 of who run a connector program, and the McMaster Gilbrea Center is our research arm. And we're the group that kind of pulls everybody together into steering committees and oversees the evaluation and communications and what have you. But what this is there's hospital connectors who work with older adults who are being released from the hospital and help them to connect to community support services. And so they might even help them fill out forms, make phone calls from them, for them, whatever, and helps to connect them to the services that they need. There are community connectors who are look for older adults who are socially isolated and work with them to sort of say, what would you like to do? Let me help you kind of get out. And then there are peer connectors who are volunteers who work with socially isolated seniors in their homes, trying to get them out of their homes and connect them into maybe recreational activities or community support services. So that project is in its 2nd year now, and we've served over 600 seniors with the hopes of serving about 2,000 over a 3-year period. It's a free service, and with the, if needed, say for a hospital connector, for example, they might work with an older adult for 6 months, connecting them up to the supports that they need. And once they have the supports that they need, we can start connecting them up to like recreational activities. But often it's, you need to kind of make sure that they're well enough and they have the supports they need in order for them to get out. It includes outreach and education, so we're trying to educate the community about social isolation. As I've said, there's a research arm to it. And the other nice thing about this project was the Retired Teachers of Ontario said to us, like, we would really like to contribute to this project. So they gave us, council, a $50,000 grant. We had to write a little proposal, but they invited us to. And what that does is it provides up to $300 per senior to help them get out in the community. So, for example, it might cover bus tickets, or it could cover the fee to belong to the senior center, that type of thing. So it tries to address those barriers that keep people socially isolated. So those are the 3 programs that I wanted to tell you about that the Hamilton Council on Aging is doing to reduce social isolation.
Thanks very much, Margaret. June, would you like to tell us about some of the work you're doing with social isolation?
Thank you. And if you live in Cambridge, we do not want you to move to either Halton or Hamilton because we're working really hard in our community. My name is June, and I have worked for the last 21 years at the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank, and I am known as a spiritual care provider, which is a very interesting and unusual title for a staff person. But in the wisdom of the board 11 years ago, the board decided that once we fed people and we helped people access information for housing and we helped them access clothing and family programs for families, people were still coming into the food bank fairly despaired. And I was involved with another program at that point called Small Steps to Success, and I would be called down to talk to someone and listen to actually their fear, their despair, their loneliness, their isolation, and I would talk to them about, how could we support them? So that was really the genesis of how I got started. Now, thanks to New Horizons, I'm sorry no one from the federal government is here. Over the last 3 years, I've offered programs which are specifically for seniors and hopefully getting seniors who are, I would call, isolated out into a program. So the first program we offered was taking the I out of isolation, and I'm very glad that this is going to move to other parts because I think it's a really unique thinking of what does it mean. It's not I am isolated, it's we need to be less isolated. The second program I did was called The Legacy of Older Women. And I had 12 women, and we met every week, and each one of them created a wonderful book about their life, and the book was bound, and they were then encouraged to share it with their family, their life story. As someone said to me in the group, should I put the bad stuff in? I said, you need to put the stuff in you want to pass on to your family. And then the third program, and we're just finishing it up this March, is called Young and Old Together, Understanding Poverty. And what we did was we brought a group of students from one of the local high schools, and the seniors and the students worked together to understand poverty. What does it mean? How did we develop the stereotypes we have about poverty, particularly poverty in seniors? And we had a ball. We really had a good time. Our Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank is a co-op. So what we do is we encourage people to work. They pay a bit of money to join it, and then they put sweat equity in. And we have a lot of seniors who participate in that program. One of the things that I actually came here to learn today, and I was a little concerned when someone said we were the experts, because I went, oh dear. Why are people so reluctant to say, I'm lonely or I'm isolated? You know, so I'm working on that. I have some answers and some thoughts on it. A quick story. One week I was coming into the food bank, and each day I came in, I kept seeing the same woman sitting on our neighbor's front stoop. Finally, I said to the receptionist, do you know why she's sitting on the front stoop? And Jane said, no, I don't. So I said, here, watch my stuff. I'm going to go over and sit on the front stoop with her. So I sat down with her, and I called her by her name. I said, I've noticed you've been coming to the food bank very early every morning, and I wonder if there's something special you need. And believe it or not, this woman said, my daughter has just gone into a group home because she has some developmental delays. But she said, I'm really, really lonely. I'm really lonely. And so what we did was, at the food bank, we found a job that she could do every morning, because we have donations of plastic bags. So she would come in and she would flatten all those bags so they were more accessible. This is a new topic for us. You know, we rush to help people put a meal on the table. And we rush to look at issues of housing, of which in Cambridge it's terrible for some families. But, you know, we aren't rushing fast enough. When I say to them, how are you today? They're very much surprised by the question, because in our society of busyness, we often don't take the time to wait for the answer. But they're very much reluctant to talk about perhaps their loneliness and their isolation. I don't think there's one person in this room that hasn't experienced both of those things at some point. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we're going to understand it better and to be able to ask the right questions to encourage people to come together. It's almost an issue that we've kept in the closet. So we support up to 1,700 families every month, plus 80 individuals that come into our emergency food bank. We're very busy, but we're not too busy to always ask the question, how are you doing today?
Thank you, June.
Thanks, June. That was a segue into what I was going to say is about our ears, listening. That is one of the most underrated parts of us that we just take for granted, I guess. So we need to listen to other people, whether it's seniors, whether it's youth, but really listening to what people are saying. And it's not just how are you, it's really getting to the depth of that. So thanks, June. I'm Linda, and I work with Community Support Connections, Meals on Wheels. We provide many supports to older adults and individuals with disabilities in the community, as our mission is to and value and empower people to live at home as long as possible with whatever supports they might need. And when I say that, it really means we need to look at the individual and what do they need. So they may need transportation. As we've talked already today about getting to programs, maybe they'd like to go, but how do you get there? So we provide transportation to medical rides, and also we're trying to work more on some of those social things, because a colleague of mine said when I first started into this business 30 years ago was it's probably more important to get a ride to get your hair done than it does to get to a medical appointment, because you're going to feel a whole lot better and that kind of thing. So it's really, really important to look at those social pieces, whether it's having lunch with a friend, doing those kinds of things that are really critical. Other programs that we provide are that help with the isolation is we have dining programs in a variety of sites in the community where people can both get a nutritional lunch as well as connect. And some of these groups are really quite small, intimate groups of maybe 8 to 9 people, so they really can have those conversations, develop those relationships. We had, when I was thinking of stories, we have a friendly visiting program as well, and it's sometimes really hard to get people connected. And so one of our care coordinators that goes out into the community and meets with seniors suggested coming to the dining program to these ladies that were looking for a volunteer. Well, they all came, and so they all became friends there, so there was no need to get an individual volunteer for them, and they started to do things elsewhere. So we need to provide those opportunities. So we have dining, we have many, many exercise programs, so it's both that exercise as well as connecting with people. One of the areas that I've been involved with primarily in the last 2 years is the caregiver support. We know that there's many, many caregivers, and caregivers can be from young, looking after early adults that maybe are living still at home with mental health or physical disabilities, to people whose parents are starting to age and they're wondering what's ahead, what can I do? It's all about prevention, to providing supports for caregivers that are supporting spouses and, again, older adults. So I provide 4-week sessions, whether they are in our office, and I provide afternoons or evenings or Saturdays. I also provide them in a very variety of places in the community, because I think, Margaret, you mentioned earlier, we need to take those programs out to where people are. I mean, that's, if we're going to reach people, maybe because of mobility, maybe because of transportation, if we can be in those locations, I think that's going to help a lot in the isolation. One of our programs we also have is the reassurance calls. We phone about 60 seniors a day, and we share that program with another agency. And it's more a check-in, so we can't really have those long conversations. But it's at least, some of these people say, at least the phone's ringing that day, and I can hear have a connection with somebody, even if it's for a few minutes. So we need to provide those opportunities where we can connect. I guess my main passion, or what I like to do, is make sure that we're talking to the senior. What do you want? What's for me is something different than what's for you. So it's really important to listen and to get that aspect from the senior. Okay.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's great to hear about all the different work going on in the area. It's incredible to hear about the senior connector programs, the ambassador programs, and this theme that keeps coming up is the importance of bringing the services to where the seniors are, right? Bringing it to them. And so I love that theme that's come up so far. So thank you, everyone, for your responses. So the second question we have for the panel today: you can be isolated at any age. So what makes it a greater concern for older adults? Someone like to volunteer to start us off?
I think this is a topic that certainly is of concern, because as we age, we may reduce some of the resources that we have, perhaps potentially financial. When we think of transportation, if you're not able to drive anymore, or you're in an isolated place, if you're in rural areas, how do we get seniors to the programs? How do we, even though we're talking about bringing services to them, we need to provide those opportunities where people can get to places. We need to look at other opportunities of transitions. We've mentioned this already. As we age, we go through transitions of retirement, we go through transitions of potential health issues. So how are we going to manage those as we age, in terms of making sure that we get the right care in the right place in terms of that? We also don't want to get caught up into, and we've mentioned this earlier today, about the ageism attitudes. I mean, we are who we are, and we're all on that same journey. So to make sure that we take into account who you are as you're younger is the same person as you age. Sometimes I do call a bit of a more so theory there, but you need to make sure that you're taking into consideration that person's likes and dislikes as they age through that journey. So that's really important, that if you weren't into social programs like playing cards or things like that, you might not necessarily want to do that later in life and go to a day program and so forth. Day programs are great, and they may have opportunities within them for individual things, but it really is important to make sure we ask that senior, what do you want to do? What pleases you, and what's going to help you? I know there's lots in terms of technology and connecting in different ways. So it's probably the most important thing is to talk to the seniors. I'm going to stop at that and let you go ahead.
Thank you. Because I'm here today for the voice of seniors that are living below the poverty line, I will address you in that vein. The people that I work with, men and women, are many, if not all of them, are living at $14,000 a year, which is $7,000 below the poverty line. They are living at $7,000 below the poverty line. So if you can just sort of translate that in your head, it means a great deal in terms of getting out. One of the things that I do is every time someone donates some money, I buy a hoard of bus tickets. Cost in Cambridge $3 a bus ticket. Each way, that's $6. But I also want to, mobility issues are a problem. I had a woman who was walking clearly a long distance, 2.5 miles to the food bank. And I said to her, boy, that's a long way. And she said, yes, but I take my bundle buggy and I lean on it. The issue of growing old when you're living in poverty is well known to Cambridge because we are a city that had an industry of the shoe and the textile industry. You can only imagine that there wasn't any pensions or very little pension, and the pensions were not transferable. I worry that there are a lot of seniors that we're not even in touch with who are living in their homes at a very low fixed income, who aren't eating well, who aren't well. And so I guess that's part of the goals of the food bank. If a person cannot come and pick up their food through our co-op or emergency food, then we have a relationship with an agency and they deliver it. So it also gives us a chance to say, hi, how are you?
I think you've certainly touched on the things I was going to say. Increased risks of premature death as we age, and the population aging, certainly. Negative health effects of loneliness and isolation, we do know that. And the other piece is the risk of elder abuse. I do training on It's Not Right, and that comes out of the University of Western Ontario, and it certainly is endorsed by the Elder Abuse Ontario Association. And I think that's really important because the more we're isolated, the more at risk we are of abuse, all types of abuse, financial, emotional, spiritual, etc. So I think those are really important considerations. And when we do these workshops, we're careful not to call it elder abuse because nobody will come. So we do call it It's Not Right, and how bystanders, neighbors, and friends, and this is about community, and the more I read about isolation, it is about community development and your neighborhoods, and how you don't have to be a bystander, you don't have to solve the problem, but how can you open your door to let that person speak the truth about what's happening and to support that person and to give them the empowerment to make good decisions for themselves. So I think that's another issue as we age that's becoming more and more prevalent.
One of the things, just talking about that, I think people are less likely to meet and talk with their neighbors now than they were in the past. You know, I used to live in an old home. Actually, I used to live in an old home in Cambridge and then in Hamilton. Had a big front porch, and the neighbors all hung out on the street, and the kids were playing on the street. And now I live in a condominium townhouse, and I just see people as their cars exit their driveway, you know. So I think that's partly contributing to social isolation. And then the other thing that makes it maybe a bigger problem nowadays is that families are so dispersed, right? So people's children may live in different communities, and so it's much harder for them to be involved in sort of companionship and, you know, keeping their older parents company and caregiving as well. And also, if you live in a rural environment, the children tend to move to the city, and the older adults are left in the rural environment, which can be sort of socially isolating, especially in the wintertime.
Great. Thank you very much. Some really interesting points there, kind of about how Canada's changing, how our society's changing, and what that means for older people now. And we've kind of jumped into question 3 a little bit, but I think that's okay. Let's just build on that, and because the third question is, whether social isolation is a new problem, or whether or not social isolation has always existed. So, does someone want to kind of add their thoughts there?
Well, again, my comments are very specific to a certain demographic. I don't think it's a new problem in terms of people having limited income and being able to access different services. However, I think the services that people want to access over the years have begun to cost more. I know we're not supposed to say we have a 2-tiered health system, but believe me, we do. Because people who cannot afford physio when they're old and other services, they can't afford those things, and so that has changed. We had in my experience more services for seniors a number of years ago. The other thing is, from my perspective of working in a faith community, churches used to have a great role in supporting people in a church who were perhaps older. They also supported people who were ill. Our churches, again, the congregations are aging. And so they don't have that, they don't have the capacity to go out and support seniors as they were at one time. I remember a great story my grandmother told me. She was in her 90s. And this was in the eastern townships in Quebec. And I said, "Are you having your chicken pie supper this year?" And she said, "No, we're not, June, because we're all getting too old, and we all know that Maud can't make a chicken pie worth a damn." And so in saying that, not only are we getting older and we're lacking, the initiative to do things, but sometimes the skills that we once had, we don't have now. The churches, I think, want to step up and they want to support the community, but I think they have an aging congregation. And this is really one of the obstacles that they're facing.
That made me think of, I do a lot of cooking at the church that I'm involved with, and when I first started going there 20-odd years ago, I would say, "Oh, those people are always in the kitchen." And my friend and I said, "We are now those people." Right? So, and so we are trying very hard to groom the younger generation, but it's sometimes a little difficult. Just to add to what June said, and also what Margaret said, is the dynamics have changed. And when you think back, Saturday night, I can remember as a child going out to the farm where my grandparents lived, and my parents and my uncles and aunts, and they would play cards somewhere, and the ladies would, I don't know what they did, but we would play with our cousins. So we're losing some of that. I'm not saying it's all gone, but we don't have those same family structures, partly because people are definitely more mobile now. People are moving across the country, different locations. So we need to look at how are we going to regain that? How are we going to do that? I think back to, as a kid, Neighborhood Watch. I don't know whether we still have that or not. Those little things in the window? Do we still have them? Okay. I haven't noticed them in our area, but it really is getting back to what Rachel talked about this morning about the community piece and making sure that you are watching out for your neighbor. And if the snow hasn't been shoveled, then maybe we need to go and check out. I know we live in a circle, and so we have an older woman that lives in our circle that we all she still shovels her own snow, but we might go and help with because we know that she wants to be very independent. So it's being very mindful of who, relational in terms of who we're living beside and with.
Yeah, can't add too much to that except about the family structures are changing. In my own family, my mother is 98, still lives on her own, and I live quite close to her, so I'm the telephone reassurance every day, and sometimes twice a day, but just to make sure that, you know, she's got her needs taken care of and she's doing well. And I'm kind of the go-to person in the whole apartment building now. So when I go over there, everybody comes and says, what's new? What's happening out there for seniors? But my own family, we have family living in Switzerland, Seattle, and all over. And I do have 5 brothers that live all over. So I'm the one person who does the main caregiving. And but that is hard because my mother always says, oh, so-and-so's children live in Australia. What does she do? What will we do? What will we do at Christmas? We can't leave her on her own. So so these are very much concerns. But again, about neighbors looking after each other. We had a neighbor across the street, and she was living on her own, and she has a blind. And I said, you know, every morning, can you just pull up your blind? And then I know you're there. So that's what she does. And if the blind isn't pulled up, then I know to go over and knock on the door. So that's a very simple remedy that you can do for some things. So sometimes they're not huge solutions, but they can really help.
The only thing I can add, I guess, is you know, where our populations are aging, and you know, now we have, I know in Hamilton, 17% of our population are over the age of 65. So just the greater number of older people sort of means that the problem is increasing because we have more people who might be facing social isolation. So yeah, and the other, you know, as many of us are growing older and living much longer, we're also getting increasing numbers of people with dementia and people with early cognitive disability, who may feel it's much more difficult to go out and to be able to, you know, to socially interact with other people when you're facing some cognitive deficits.
Thank you very much. Some really great points there about kind of the role of churches in our communities. More tech problems. I don't know. I think I'm a bad luck charm. I don't know what's going on. But also kind of the importance of, as we heard from a few of our panelists, the importance of keeping an eye on each other, keeping an eye not only on our family members and staying connected to our family, but also keeping an eye out for our neighbors, right, and maintaining that sense of community. So that was really great. Thank you. So, you know, we've heard a bit about community, we've heard a bit about kind of housing a little bit, but, you know, rolling right into question 4, what are some of the kind of main factors that impact social isolation for older people?
Well, I have a long list. Do you want me to just read my list?
Sure.
All right. Living alone, being age 80 or over, having no children or family contact, having a chronic condition or disability, cognitive impairment or dementia, lacking of transportation, living in low income, a major life transition such as the death of a spouse, being a caregiver, depending on where you live, like a rural environment or an unsafe environment where people are afraid to go outside, not speaking English language, and membership in a vulnerable group such as a racial minority or the LGBTQ. Yes. That cover most of them?
Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone want to chime in? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we have found is newcomers and immigrant populations. Many in Milton, we have one of the largest growing communities in Canada, and we have a large immigrant population that live with adult children, and they may not speak English, and they're often caregivers for their grandchildren. So we don't even see many of that population in terms of how to reach them and how we can, supply them with information about services that are available in their language. So one of the things we are going to do with our connectors is get into the high schools during parent-teacher night. And some of these kids, these teens in the schools, can get information to their grandparents. So we have to be creative about how we do that. The biggest thing, I think, is what I hear is from seniors is the the sense of belonging, the lack of sense of belonging. Where do I belong? And so that's such a huge question, and certainly something we try and address. So we do have groups in Burlington. There's a Red Leaf Cultural Group made up of 200 Chinese seniors. We go in and do things with them as well, and ask what their needs are and how we can best help. Lack of friends. You know, my mother at 98 has lost most of her friends now. They've passed away. And that gets very lonely for people. I keep redoing her address book, and she'll say, they're off. So, or at Christmas, she doesn't get a card, and that's a really tough one. Including with the immigrants, going back to that, just I was reading up on that too, and it's sometimes a loss of status, perhaps, and cultural difference when they come here. And all of a sudden they find they're living in poverty and no jobs, other things that are happening. Social networks may be more limited, so that's a really hard piece as well. Also, some of the research we did found that people living in long-term care homes estimated to be double, their experience of loneliness could be double those living in community dwellings. So even though they're living in long-term care or retirement homes, their own experience of severe loneliness can be quite extreme. And I know I have meetings sometimes in retirement homes because they give me free space. And quite often I'll have someone come up and say, can you help me? I just don't want to be here. I came here because my children wanted me to be close, but I don't see my children, and I left my friends behind. So never assume someone isn't lonely in that kind of a situation, because I have found that quite often. And of course, women are living longer than men, so women do experience that loneliness, I think, quite a bit. But also men, we have to be very mindful over a certain age, are high risk of depression and suicide. So, and I do have a personal story on that too. And so I have experienced that. And so we have to be mindful of all these factors as we age. So anyway, I'll let you go through.
Well, we're gradually working down our list. I think we must have all read the same resource material. But one of the things that I see is sometimes the seniors that I'm working with, they're just tired of battling getting to places. They're just tired. And sometimes it's just easier to say, it's okay, June. I can watch my soaps on the TV and give me all those reasons. The other thing is, and I seem to deal with it a lot as a spiritual care provider, is there's sort of some disunity within the family, that there's something that's happened. Their children don't talk to them for one reason or another, and could be legitimate reasons, I'm sure. But sometimes, you know, if you sit and listen to their story, and if they want some suggestions, you can help them open some of those doors. It breaks my heart at the food bank to see the number of seniors who are actually alone at Christmas. It is just a phenomenal. I said to one of my coworkers, she reminded me that I couldn't save everyone, and that I wasn't a knight in shining armor. But it just, you know, the isolation is very difficult at specific times of the year. And I've often thought, you know, if I had time, I'd like to look at something creatively where we began to pair people and match people and saying, gee, you know, Margaret doesn't have anyone either, and she likes to knit and you like to knit, or she likes this TV, you know. So it's a matter of timing, and of course, timing, it's also a matter of funding. The other thing that I find is loneliness is contagious. Loneliness is really contagious. So if you live in a building where there are other people who are also despaired and feeling lonely, and you even talk to them occasionally, you know, you're both feeding off the same energy level. So I'm not sure how we deal with that, except I've often thought, you know, we need to go into some of these high-rise apartments where there's lots of seniors who live and set up a flash coffee break and invite everyone down. At the food bank, we really have great response to our programs, particularly if we offer food. So I would offer donuts and stuff like that. But again, it's timing.
Thanks. And I've got most of my list checked off as well. We did talk a little bit about health, but there's a couple of things around health that sometimes we may not be mindful of or think about. Certainly sensory issues, if people aren't comfortable with hearing or seeing that kind of piece, as well as eating. We were talking just before lunch about if somebody has some issues around their dentures and they may be embarrassed to be sitting and eating with other people, that may be something that restricts them from going out. The same may be with if somebody's dealing with an issue such as incontinence and may not have been to a doctor or may not be aware of what it is, that there may be a solution and so forth. So that may in fact inhibit them from getting out. So those are all kinds of issues that are not visible but are very much kept probably to themselves, may share with a friend but may not, or family. And so those kinds of invisible things we don't see, and it's again getting back to that listening and getting to know a person and that relationship to find out what is it that's not permitting them to go out, and what are some solutions, because some of them could be fairly simple solutions.
Thank you very much. Some great responses there about some of the potential factors that can be involved in social isolation. I think the responses from our panelists really underscore the complexity of social isolation, how there are so many different factors that go into both the causes and the outcomes of social isolation. So thank you very much for your responses. So question number 5, what changes have you seen over the years in the impact of social isolation among seniors? So in other words, has it gotten worse in your opinion? Has the problem grown? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, just the fact that we're having this wonderful day today, we're talking about it. And I think we've all kind of talked about it amongst ourselves, amongst agency providers or groups that you go into it. But as we've said before, it is a community response that we need to look at and yet look at individuals as well. So we do have lots of great programs. We've heard some great ones in Hamilton. Connectors taking programs to where they are. We also always know what is good for others, but making sure that we include the senior. And I think that's my biggest piece in terms of making sure we include them in the decision making and what is it that is good for them. Age-friendly movement is certainly another piece. And there's lots of opportunities. I say in one of the groups that I do, we are continuing to learn, and so there may be new things that we haven't even thought of in terms of what the solutions are.
Thank you, Linda. I guess from a food bank perspective, we are seeing more and more seniors in need of help, and thankfully, we are seeing more seniors who do need help coming to the food bank. I was talking to Sharon Livingston the other day, and we have seniors using our shelter, our overnight shelters. And I have to tell you, a woman who is aging, I can't imagine getting down on one of those small cots and sleeping all night. I imagine their backs must really hurt by the time they get up in the morning. Every time we have an increase in cost, every time there's a bad storm in the States and they say, oh, well, the orange crop has just been annihilated, that means that that particular produce is not going to be available to the seniors who are on low income because it's going to cost more. It's going to cost more. At our particular food bank, we're encouraging people, and we're trying to get more fresh fruit and vegetables year-round to them. But a can of peaches has still got a lot of sugar in it, and fortunately I haven't had to eat a can of peaches lately, but it wasn't good when I did have to eat it. So those, every time the cost goes up, their source of income, well, not source of income, but their income resources go down.
Not much to add, except with the older population growing, obviously the situation is almost hate to say the word epidemic, but it's something we need to pay attention to. And the fact that the UK now has a minister responsible for senior isolation is pretty important. So I think the fact that we're coming together and talking about it, and there's a lot of articles, and CBC News had a piece on Sunday around different things. So I think there's a lot more information coming and how we can address such a complex issue, and we can't do it alone. So, and it really needs to be the bottoms-up, top-down approach where we hear from people what the real issues are and how we can motivate to change a lot of the things that are happening or not happening. So.
So we all know that we're facing a real crisis in healthcare. We have a lot of seniors who are waiting in hospitals for long-term care beds or waiting to get community services so that they can go home, and we're stacked up in emergency. And yes, we need more long-term care beds, but that can't be the only solution. I mean, we have to think about, because we know social isolation has health impacts, we have to think about creating more interventions to reduce social isolation and therefore, improve people's health and maybe free up hospital beds, not have so many people go into long-term care and need community support services. So I think we really need to sort of get ahead of the problem at the front end rather than waiting for all these health crises to occur.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. I think we'll just keep rolling into question 6 because I think this is a really important one. We heard in question 1 that there is a lot of really important, great work being done right now to fight social isolation, from senior ambassador programs, Meals on Wheels, you name it. There's a lot going on. But what do you think, from your point of view, needs to be done to advance the work that we're doing?
Well, I wanted to say that I think there's a bit of a misconception that reducing isolation is primarily about connecting seniors to recreational activities. But it's a lot more complex than that. So that the issue is not about it's also about the fact that for a lot of older adults, their basic needs aren't being met. And you have to start with meeting the basic needs in terms of income, in terms of connecting older adults to community support services so they can get meals delivered, for example, helping them figure out how they can get around the town in terms of transportation, home care, health care. All those things need to be addressed before we can start looking at, say, connecting people up to recreational activities. Right? So, and the other point I want to make is that isolated seniors, they tend to need a lot of help to navigate the service system and connect with supports and activities. So often they might be discharged from the hospital or from CCAC. They're given a whole bunch of brochures, but there's no follow-up. There's no connecting them to the community support services or helping them to connect. So we really need connector programs, for example, to intervene, to help people connect to these services, to help them fill out the forms, to make some of the telephone calls, to really move beyond the brochures here. You do it yourself.
Yeah, and just looking at the information piece, having the information is one thing, but knowing what to do with it is another. And, just when you call somebody, which I did for my mother the other day, and I was like, oh my gosh, put on hold, 10 minutes later, all these things. And if you have hearing issues or challenges and you're trying to do that, it becomes very, very difficult. So I think those are really important pieces. Also, advancing the good work. I know with our age-friendly work, when we think of the built environment, that's my bugaboo right now, is looking at planning departments and how we can look at when you're building your communities or enhancing your communities, things like benches, good lighting. Safety is a big thing for people, making sure that walkability and physical safety is important in your community. And having amenities available is one thing, but having them close to you is another. I read a really good article on benches, and benches are like front porches. And so when Margaret was talking about front porch she had when she was living in different places, and we just can't underestimate the importance of a bench in front of an apartment building or two where people can gather and just talk. So again, sometimes things don't cost a lot of money, but it's just some innovative ideas that people can think of to make their communities a better place to be. So those folks on the planning with your municipalities and that have to be involved in understanding that as your communities age and grow, because Canada is built for cars. And so how do we move forward on some of these things is important to address. Housing, is another thing. Just got to talk about housing, but housing is another issue that we face a lot of issues with, and accessible housing, and talking to developers. We're trying to talk to developers. I know Dr. Puxty from Queens, I was talking to him, and he's a geriatrician, and he said it only cost developers another $15,000 to put in when they're building a home to make it accessible, really, to have wide enough doorways and everything. So we should be doing more advocating for things like that. And also I know seniors who are living in basement apartments, and they are isolated because they can't even get up the stairs. They just can't be bothered. It's just too much for them. And so needing to address those issues, and I think people who have the power to make changes, or politicians, need to understand these issues are in our communities, because sometimes they don't feel there is. So we're all fine and we're all wealthy, we're all okay. So anyway.
Thank you, Heather. I think one of the big issues, and we talked about this, Sharon talked about it when we had someone from the federal government here, but we need to get more secure funding to look at this issue. We can't do it the way we're doing it piecemeal. We apply for New Horizons grants or whatever, and we do it for 6 to 8 months, and then it's finished. So we need more consistent, stable funding. I think we also need to address the stigma of people talking about social isolation and loneliness. I know when I talk to people, I try at the beginning not to use those two words, because there seems to be a judgment that if I'm socially isolated or loneliness, have I done something wrong that puts me in that position? Have I not been extroverted enough? Have I not been gregarious? Do I not join enough stuff? So we almost need to bring it out of the closet, because I've already admitted to this whole room that there are times I feel lonely, but it's something that we need to dive into to support each other spiritually, actually, and emotionally. The other thing I think we need to do is we need in Canada to become more vocal, or more on print, and thank you that we're going to get at least one PhD dissertation on this topic. But when I went years ago, when I started into this, or not years ago, just a couple of years ago, I found stuff from Australia. I found stuff from the UK. I found stuff from various countries in Europe. And believe it or not, I found stuff from South Africa, which kind of surprised me. But I was really glad that I met Heather today, because if you go online, she's written a wonderful document called Seniors, Loneliness, and Social Isolation. The date was March 2016, and it is a wonderful article. So maybe we need to be more intentional about informing ourselves about this issue and the many layers it has to it, because it's not simple.
Thanks, June. That was actually my comment next, was to be intentional and to be relational. We need to get at that in terms of what the issues are from a perspective of seniors, and as well as the whole prevention piece. We're all aging. We're all on that same journey. So we all need to look at that in terms of how do we want to age, how do we want to age positively, and so forth. So that's that sort of paradigm shift, or that's that mindset that I think we need to go for. I agree with June, sustainable funding. I mean, we always do it no matter what, because we're passionate about the work we do. And the more we do, they'll say, oh, I guess you're okay. And then you say, well, should I hang back? But you don't want to do that, because we're all passionate about the work we do. So it's sort of that double-edged sword in terms of that. So, I think that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Some really great responses there. We're doing so much already, but there are some really great ways that we can move forward. And I think this flows very well into the last question we have for the panel before we open it up to the floor for questions. And I think we've had a few panelists kind of allude to their responses here. But the final question for the panel is, whose responsibility should it be to address social isolation and carry out this work?
I got the mic first. I think as we've already talked about it today, it is community. We're all in it. We're all, as I said, we're all aging. We definitely need a lot of work along the way, and with that comes that relationship and that cooperation and inclusiveness of the government to have them understand that this is what we need to move forward. We need to talk prevention. I mean, the health, and we know that people are living longer, and we know people are, with our exercise programs and all of that, we know that that's working, and so we need to work harder in that piece.
Thank you. When I was a much younger person, I was introduced to a song, and the song was called Sometimes I Wish My Eyes Hadn't Been Open. And it was when I was just being introduced to feminism, and I liked that song. But now, as I move through in my life, I think of that song, and my eyes are constantly being opened to different issues. And right now, it is the issue that I worry about the people in my community who are socially isolated and lonely. The Jesuits used to say, if you want a solution to poverty, ask the poor. If you want a solution to poverty, you need to ask the poor. And I give that as an example because they said it many, many, many years ago. And I also think it is applicable to what we're doing here today. We can't resolve this issue. We can be part of it, but we can't. We have to hear the voices of people who are marginalized because of social isolation and loneliness. We can't do it for them. We need to be part of the discussion, but we do not need to give solutions. We need to be part of the understanding of the devastation of this situation. The other thing is we need to begin to educate the whole community on this. I'm sorry in our high schools that we've lost programs which are significant in terms of perhaps cooking or whatever. Programs where we have a discussion on humankind. But we need to start talking to our kids, our teenagers. The program we did in the summer was a great success. These teenagers were just wonderful. And, the last day they said, jokingly, we're going to solve the issue of poverty in older adults. And that was very heartening. The other thing is we need to have a dialogue with multidisciplines. It's not just good enough for me to come here as a spiritual care provider or as a social worker or as a healthcare provider. We need to get together and talk about this because, again, we're not isolated just in our own backyard. We need to talk about, so what are you doing? Can we work together on this? We have trouble doing this because I think we're trying to put out too many fires, and it would be nice if we could sit down, have a cup of coffee, and say, okay, let's list 10 things that we can do together to begin to look at and eradicate this in our community.
I can't say it much better than that. And certainly it is everybody's responsibility to deal with this issue. And again, building capacity through organizations to address the isolation through innovation. I have worked in nonprofit for over 40 years in different areas. And sometimes we tend to work and, I'll use the word silos because we do. We have, we're nonprofits, we have our funding, we hold on to it. And it's not until you come together and do some collaborative work that you realize what other organizations are doing and to share resources, and you're all dealing with the same issues. So I think we have to sort of put down those barriers and see what we can do together for greater impact in our community and to really share the knowledge and the resources that we all have. And again, as June was saying, and Linda, the awareness and public education on this is really key. And to hear from people who are isolated and who are lonely. And every intervention is very unique to each individual, because one size does not fit all in this situation. So we have to be open to that as well.
Well, I would agree with those points, and just add, in Hamilton, one of the things that we're doing, we're recognizing that we need to work collaboratively, and there's a lot of health-related tables, where hospitals sit around and, talk about the needs of hospitals. And so we've actually started, we think that the nonprofit sector can take real leadership in terms of helping to reduce social isolation. And so we've created a new table called the Seniors at Risk Collaborative. We have about, I think 35 people all came to the first meeting. And, that table, the idea behind that table is to start to address collaboratively issues like social isolation, elder abuse, low income and poverty, from a sort of a collaborative approach. So that's one of the things that we're doing in Hamilton, to sort of try and address social isolation more collaboratively.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your response. I think the theme that kind of underscored that question was the importance of breaking down barriers and having conversations with everyone present, including the people who need to speak for themselves and people who are isolated themselves. So before we open it up to the floor for some questions, let's just give our panel a round of applause for all the great work they've done. So I think we have time just for a few questions before the final remarks. Yep.
So the question was, I addressed the issue that people are just getting tired of fighting to go there. Some of the issues are, when I talk to seniors I work with, June, I don't think I have right clothes. And then, or they say, I don't have bus tickets, June, and I can certainly help them with that. Or, I don't want to try anymore, June. I'm just tired. I have lived with this feeling of being marginalized for so long. Let somebody else fight the battle. I think there's probably some depression in there for sure. But I think that they're just tired. Whenever I speak as an advocate for seniors, there are so many seniors who come up and thank me. And I think they haven't found their voice, or they don't think their voice is being heard.
So we have a comment/question from the audience here that's been brought up. So the comment: could be an avoidance factor at play related to fear of dying by younger generations. Has some thought been given to how we can help people face and reduce this fear? You want to comment?
I think I know on an individual basis I may talk to clients about that, but I know part of the caregiving groups that I do is talking about a lot of that self-care, and also what are those fears as we age? What are the things that you're concerned about and worried about? Because we all might feel them and come up, but unless you actually get it out, and I call it wringing out the sponge, it's processing that information, because it may not be as fearful as it is, or if it is, what can we do to look at some ways, whether it's some support counseling or just one-to-one or connecting. But the fact that it's coming to the surface, we definitely want to encourage, and I'm sure, June, you find that in your work, that having that conversation, having that dialogue is really important.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that one of the issues that the people that I'm listening to, they're talking about is, June, who's going to pay for my funeral? Who's going to pay for my funeral? And they know I do lots of memorial services and funerals at the food bank, so they know they have me. But they worry about, is there going to be money to be able to pay for my funeral? And then the other thing is, June, do you think anybody will come?
So we have another question/comment from the audience here. We do so many unpaid jobs, like pumping gas, banking, bill paying. As we get more involved in technology, will seniors be able to afford to become involved, thus increasing isolation? Any comments there? Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. No, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead. Yeah, the question was, as we get more involved in technology, will seniors be able to afford to become involved? I think maybe the question is around kind of affording yeah, to learn how to use technology and to stay involved as we use more and more technology in our lives. Yeah, great question.
I guess one of the things with that is, we talked a little bit about that, is the whole piece around the intergenerational and working on that piece of those people that know technology and understand technology will interface with seniors to do some teaching. And you know, some people are open to that and some people aren't, but I think we have to provide those opportunities for sure.
No, I know that I'm sure they do that here too in the libraries in Burlington. They have actually teens helping with seniors with technology, etc. My biggest concern always, and I advocate for this all the time with our municipalities, please make things available in hard copy. For our senior connectors, I know for a fact we have a table full of resources. They like to take it home and to read. Not everybody has access to a computer. Not everybody wants a computer. And so I was just at a transportation meeting in Halton Hills, and they had online, this survey, and it's only in a few places hard copy. And I said it should be in the faith groups and the food bank and everywhere where people can have access to it. So again, it's always those issues. And we were talking about technology at lunch and just saying how, although it's wonderful for information, it removes us from that face-to-face conversation that you really need with people. And everybody's texting now, and what's wrong with picking up a phone and just talking to people, right? So just these kinds of things we have to face daily, and just to be mindful. Anything to add?
Okay, I think because of time constraints, we just have time for one more question. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
This is a perspective of someone in the room, and perhaps it's a perspective of the era we're in. People in Canada, some are snobs or standoffish. They don't want to get involved or help another person out. Families are getting neglectful of their elderly. Older people need support of a family, and instead of living their own selfish lives. And I appreciate the comment because it's something that is really at the crux of loneliness and isolation. One of the things that I do at the food bank is I try to get people to understand or to think about the concept of naming family outside of a biological family. For example, my sisters live quite a far away, and I don't see them. And so over the years, I've adopted other people and call them family. So that's an alternative. Not an easy one, but it's certainly something to think about.
Thank you for sharing that. So the last question that we'll have time for today before the closing remarks, I think it's a good one to end off on, actually. How can we learn about the services and programs that are available? Because that's definitely a question people have is, okay, what's being offered and how can I access that? And the kind of second part to that question is, is this something that can be included in the newspaper? Is that something that we might consider?
I'm just going to jump in before Margaret does, but does everyone know what 211 is? 211 is one of the best guarded secrets, but if you want to know where to access something, how to do it, where to go, you just dial 211 and there's somebody, a live person on the end of the line that's going to help you. Thanks, Margaret.
That was my comment too. And actually, if you just dial 211 and then you say like Cantonese, then someone will call you back who can speak that language. So, but I know I've gone out to all kinds of workshops and presentations. You always ask, how many here have heard of 211? You're probably, in the know, but often older adults, no one has heard of 211. And then there's, if you're in Hamilton, we have Information Hamilton. I don't know if you have some sort of equivalent in Waterloo, but you can also phone them or go online, and they'll provide information about services and activities available.
Great. Thank you so much, panel. I think that will conclude the panel for today, just because we're short on time. So I'll have Jason come back up for the closing remarks for the afternoon.
So thank you so much, Rachel, and to all of our panelists for that. That was great. And I do want to add, with regard to the questions, apologies for not having portable mics so that everyone can have their questions heard. And we were time limited, but we have provided some sheets on the table. So if you have any burning questions or anything that you want to ask that has not been answered, whether it's by Rachel or by any of our panelists or project members, please write it down. We will gather those at the end. We can contact you directly if you put your information on it. Otherwise, we will be sharing those questions and responses anonymously if you don't put your information. So it will be shared on the Social Planning Council's website, Council on Aging's website, and other places where we can share it. So I just wanted to say a few words. I'll keep it short and sweet. First, I just wanted to thank everyone who made today possible. So that includes, but is not limited to, our keynote and our panel, all of our volunteers, including our peer mentors, everyone that served on the advisory committee for this project, all of our original project partners, which included, as mentioned before, the Cambridge Council on Aging, the Cambridge Food Bank, Housing Cambridge, and the Social Planning Council, but also some of the partnerships we formed along the way. Community Support Connections, Community Justice Initiatives, Riviera Homes have all been instrumental in seeing this project through. And then also just everyone who's joined us here today to be part of this discussion. I think it's really important that we keep these kinds of discussions going and take action. So part of our intention today was to hold an event to deepen our understanding, our collective understanding of social isolation, and then to raise awareness of the kinds of work and programs that exist to address that. And then beyond that, we also were hopeful that this may, inspire and encourage some more work in the future to address these types of issues, because it's only going to get more important as the population ages. So I certainly hope that has achieved that for you today. And again, thank you all for joining us, and happy International Women's Day.